Morning, everyone. If you could find your seats, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. It's November 14th, 2024. I'm going to call the business meeting of the South Florida Water Management District to order. We're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Now that I've asked you to sit down, I'm going to ask you to stand up. Colonel Roman, would you, as our veteran, please help say the Pledge of Allegiance? Thanks very much for being here today. We're glad to be in the city of Clewiston and Hendry County for our November Governing Board meeting. I want to thank the city of Clewiston and Hendry County for incredible hospitality this week and for hosting us here today in Clewiston. I also want to thank all of you who traveled here to join us for this meeting. We are live streaming the meeting when we hold board meetings offsite. We don't have the capability for virtual public comment. The district opened a public comment period for the public and stakeholders to provide written comment in advance of today's meeting. We did not receive any e-comment. Those who are here in person may comment by filling out a card there at the welcome desk and give that to the staff, and we'll make sure you get a chance to speak. Board members, I'm going to ask you make sure your microphone is on and that you speak into the mic so the attendees can hear you. As a courtesy to others who wish to speak, members of the public are asked to comment only once on each topic. Beloved district employees who recently passed away. Thomas Scotty White started at the district in 2012 as a structure maintenance technician and then moved over to pump stations and became a crew chief. He was responsible for Lake Okeechobee South Shore stations, and he managed several important projects. Scotty's going to be deeply missed, not only by the district team, but by many people in our community. The mark he made in our lives and in Clewiston is going to be felt for a long time. Robert Bob Urban. We're also saddened by the news of the passing of Bob Urban. Bob had a long career with the district as a principal electrical engineer and would have celebrated 30 years at the district next March. Bob worked on all aspects of electrical engineering, whether it involved troubleshooting in the field, emergency response after a storm, acting as engineer of record for internal design, or reviewing designs prepared by others. Both Scotty and Bob will be greatly missed, and please join me in a moment of silence honoring Scotty White and Bob Urban. Thank you. Now I'd like to recognize some special guests who are in the audience. Emma Bird, Chair of the Hendry County Commission, is with us. Thank you very much, ma'am. I understand you don't want to speak, but thank you for being here. Hendry County Commissioner Rowdy Howard. If you'd like to speak, sir, the mic is yours.
Good morning. I'm Commissioner Emory Rowdy Howard, and on behalf of my colleagues, I am pleased to welcome you all to Hendry County, and we hope you've enjoyed your time here. Hendry County is home to over 226,000 acres of state and federally owned conservation land, including 66,000 acres owned by the district, and is also included in 2 designated basin management action plans. Our agricultural entities, who are the backbone of our communities, are environmental stewards in their own right and have diligently worked towards improving their processes which benefit our water and their farms. Over the last several years, Hendry County has focused much of our grant and legislative appropriation efforts on enhancing and expanding our wastewater infrastructure to be part of the solution to achieving cleaner water throughout our region. We successfully secured funding to construct an approximately 9-mile wastewater force main along the US 27 State Road 80 corridor just up the road from here, an area primed for economic development. Additionally, for the western side of Hendry County, we have been fortunate to receive funding to repair and expand wastewater infrastructure in Port LaBelle, one of the county's fastest growing residential areas. While preserving our agricultural-focused rural heritage and the way of life is something we all cherish and value, we understand that growth is inevitable throughout our state, and we appreciate the continued work and partners such as the Southwest Florida Water Management District to address this growth in a smart and beneficial way for our residents. We want the people who have called this place home for generations to continue to thrive and pass it on to generations to come better than we found it. And with that, I thank you again and welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Howard. We also have City of Clewiston Commissioner Molly Gardner. Commissioner Gardner?
Thank you so much. On behalf of the Clewiston City Commission and the community of Clewiston, we extend a sweet welcome to the board, to the staff, and to all those who've traveled here today. Wow, such a great week, not only for Clewiston, but for Hendry County. The ribbon cutting that took place for the new field station, it strengthens our community for the future, and certainly the relationship with Water Management District. We're so thankful for that. And then the C-139 ground ribbon cutting, that's amazing. Everglades strategies coming to fruition, which I know is what this board has been working on diligently, and so appreciate that. And now today, addressing the business at hand for the district that impacts us all. I know that sometimes when you guys make decisions, it's carefully researched, and some people rejoice and are happy with the decisions, and at times other people are not so happy with the decisions. But we're thankful for the work, the dedication that each of you have, and as well as your staff members, because I know that your work is made easier because of their work. And so we appreciate it. And as we talk about water, and you guys are constantly talking about water as well as your staff, for Clewiston, it's 100% of our viability as a community being fishing and farming. Mr. Bergeron, last night you said water was our most precious resource, and it really is for us. We cannot live as a community, whether it's on Lake Okeechobee for the fishing or whether it's for water supply for our farming companies in the area. It is vital. It is 100% of our economy. I cannot compete with Drew's fun facts, but I do have one that I'd like to share with all of y'all because it fits right in with Mr. Bergeron with what you said and also what we see in our community, that water is our most precious resource. When the Spanish explorers first saw Lake Okeechobee, they didn't name her Okeechobee. They named her Laguna del Espíritu Santo, which means Lagoon of the Holy Spirit. And for them, it was a resource. And for us today, and for each of us in our area, it is a resource. It is a precious resource. So remember us when we talk about Lake Okeechobee, when we talk about farming, and that it is our very, very livelihood and our viability as a community. So again, thank you for being here with us today. We're honored that the district is here, and we're so thankful for the work that's done each and every day that sometimes we won't hear about, but we know it impacts us. So remember us well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Commissioner Gardner. We also have LaBelle's Mayor, Julie Wilkins. Hi. You're
Nothing to say, just glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm glad you're here as well. Thank you very much for being here. And all of your hospitality here in Hendry County has been wonderful. We're going to go now to employee recognition. So if you guys, girls, lady, would join me down in front of the seal, we'll let Executive Director Bartlett take over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right. So we have a November 2024 Employee of the Month. He is Robert Van Valkenburg, Instrumentation Control Tech at the Clewiston Field Station, just nearby here in Clewiston. So instrumentation control, that is basically at every structure, pump station, anything. You need instruments to turn the pumps on, turn them off, monitor them, open structures. So instrumentation is critical to our flood control infrastructure because it's how we operate the system. And Robert is front and center in trying to make sure in this Clewiston area that we get that done. He is currently supervising the G404 repower project, and he does design reviews. As we're designing these structures and pump stations for the rebuild or the construction. He's right there helping with design to make sure we do it right so it works every single time. So in this area, he was involved in the A2 STA, which is the EA Reservoirs STA, the 623 pump station, the S8, S2, S3, S4, G404 engine repower, lots of things. But then, of course, we do have vacancies, and so he is stepping in for another instrument control vacancy to help out with the C43 reservoir project and the S470 pump station. But he does a lot of work. We clearly depend on him, but that's not why we're recognizing him this month. What we're recognizing him for is his contributions to these hurricanes we've been having in the state of Florida. He left his family, hunkered down in the G508 pump station for both Helene and Milton, because we do that because we need to deal with issues that may crop up during the hurricane and be able to rapidly respond right after the hurricane. And we found ourselves in a situation where we had to rapidly respond here. We have, as you've heard, we had power loss throughout our system, but we had generators kick on for everything except for a telemetry tower that we had. And if you have a telemetry tower go down, that means you're not talking to your system. And so Robert was there. He grabbed the backup generator. He was ready, prepared for this kind of situation. He went out there and within hours had the power right back to that telemetry tower, and we got that thing rolling. We're able to provide the flood control we needed and didn't miss a beat. And it's because of Robert's efforts. Not only is he a great employee in doing all this, but he's there during those hurricanes and responds right away. And that is why Robert Van Valkenburg is our November Employee of the Month. All right. We have a theme this month. It's hurricanes. So our November 2024 Team of the Month is Hurricane Helene Rapid Response Debris Removal Team. And that is Johnny Brown, Joshua Brown, Brandon Collier, Joey Conroy, Kent Farmer, Terry Gosa, Cody McElroy, Rance Pendry, James Reynolds, David Rowe, and John Singerland, and Jack Theriault. So, Helene went by, and of course there was impacts all up and down the West Coast, right? And particularly the debris in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area was pretty significant. And so there was a real debris removal demand going on in that area, and then Milton was popping up and headed right for that area. And the last thing you need is piles of debris in neighborhoods when you have a hurricane approaching. And so they gave us a call, and this team responded. So we deployed 4 front loaders, retrofitted them with a new bucket to handle any kind of debris, assembled teams, loaded those front loaders onto trucks to send 4 teams up there with a crew chief and teams to go remove debris. It was loaded with 2 days worth of fuel, 2 days worth of food, 2 days worth of water, and they were deployed to work 24 hours around the clock for 2 days. 6-hour shifts, crew supervisor, making sure that things were happening, calling the haul trucks, making sure they were there when they needed to be there. We had 3 teams in the neighborhoods, 1 team at the debris site, moving debris. And they worked hard and fast, and 24 hours around the clock, sleeping in trucks, 6 hours on, 6 hours off, 6 hours on, moving debris. And they cleared streets and streets and streets of debris in that 2-day period. After of course, they had to evacuate for Milton, but I got a call after Milton passed, like right after Milton passed, from the DOT secretary up there, and he said, Mr. Bartlett, those crews you sent up there, oh my gosh, they were so impressive. And he didn't have to call me, but he said they stayed on us. We are like, where's the debris trucks? We were working hard to keep up with trucks, to keep up with your teams loading those trucks. And so he didn't have to call me. He called me. I said, sir, we're the South Florida Water Management District. Of course we were great, but it's this team that really knocked it out of the park, and that is why they're our Team of the Month. Congratulations.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Bartlett, and thanks particularly to you all who helped out in the hurricanes, having been the recipient of a hurricane once. I can't tell you how nice it is to have someone clearing debris from you, and it means the world to the homeowners, and the fact you guys were willing to do that and go over it, it means everything, so God bless you all. We're going to go now to agenda revisions. Molly, is there any changes to the agenda? Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none, Mr. Chairman.
Great. And I'm going to poll the board members for abstentions, and I'll start with you, Mr. Bergeron. Do you have any abstentions?
No.
Thanks. Mr. Steinle? No. Thanks. Thank you. I don't have any. Colonel Roman?
I have none.
Thanks. And Mr. Butler?
I have none.
Thank you. We'll go now to item number 7, which is the Big Cypress Basin report from our chair of the Big Cypress Basin, Colonel Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My report is for the October 25th, 2024 Big Cypress Basin Board meeting that was held in Collier County. The meeting opened with the Basin Administrator's report from Lisa Keeler, who acknowledged the dedication of staff during Hurricane Helene and Milton. She then highlighted the completion of the fiscal year 24 capital projects that enhanced the resiliency of our flood control system. She then provided an update on the ongoing canal assessment study, which evaluates our flood control system and the work that's needed to maintain our level of service. Her report concluded with the proposed Basin Board meeting schedule for 2025. Next, Steve Baisden from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers provided an update on the Picayune Strand Restoration Project, highlighting milestones and the final construction plans. In January, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers will be bringing in their heavy equipment team and with an additional 30 people to finish the Miller Canal for the 2025 restoration completion. So the Corps plans to do a full court press on that project beginning in January. Next, Dr. Sean Clem from Audubon's Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary presented updates on the Ecosystem Restoration Project. In 2023, more than 270 acres of invasive willow were mulched as part of restoration. The monitoring results showed positive ecosystem responses, so the upcoming steps include continued treatment and additional removals in 2025 and 2026. Laura Lehman then provided an overview and update on the Corkscrew Watershed Initiative, outlining both the short and long-term strategies and projects. The discussion focused on hydrological improvements aimed at supporting the ecological restoration of the sanctuary. Lastly, Pete Kwiatkowski provided a comprehensive 5-year update on the Lower West Coast Saltwater Intrusion Mapping Project. Overall, the saltwater interface line has remained consistent with the mapping exercises conducted 5 years ago, with just a slight saltwater movement observed both seaward and landward in different aquifers. In summary, for areas that had landward saltwater movement, staff will work with the local utilities and consumptive use permittees regarding their pumping, and they will also look for opportunities to acquire more monitoring. We closed out our last meeting of the year with technical and staff reports. Our next Basin Board meeting is scheduled for Friday, February 28th, 2025 at 11 a.m. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair, subject to the board's questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Does anyone have any questions or comments? My only comment would be to acknowledge the staff of BCB and Ms. Keeler, because you went through 2 hurricanes also, and I know
Yes.
they did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
We'll look now at the approval of the October 17th minutes. Does anyone have any changes to make to the minutes? If not, is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes, Mr. Chair.
Second?
Thanks. I have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Steinle.
Yes.
I'm going to vote yes. Colonel Norman?
Yes.
Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Thanks. That passes unanimously. Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Whenever we take the board meeting on the road, we always like to do some highlights of efforts that we're doing in the local community to help benefit the local community. Before we get there, I have one other item to share with you, and that is the transition at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection Agency for the secretary position. Sean Hamilton has moved on to pursue other careers after his great service, and we'll all miss Sean. I'll miss him personally a lot. He was such a strong supporter of us, very helpful in all of our initiatives and activities, and honestly just a great guy all around, so he'll be sorely missed. Alexis Lambert has been appointed. She will start the first week of December for Florida Department of Environmental Protection. I knew her and worked with her when she was at Department of Health, and she's basically been a career public servant, very good at what she does, and I'm very confident she'll be a huge supporter of what we do in Everglades as well in my conversations I've had with her. And so it's, I think we'll be well served, and thank you to the governor for making sure we have good leadership at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So moving into some of the things I would like to highlight, basically, the city of Clewiston and Hendry County has been sort of a very much of a center point in the South Florida Water Management District's history. And because the flood control started around Lake Okeechobee and with the connection to the Everglades, which is right where Clewiston and the towns south of Lake Okeechobee are. And so, so we've had obviously some really catastrophic flooding in our history, which resulted in the building and sustaining of the Herbert Hoover Dike, and then the flood control system of the CNSF that was built in the 50s and 60s to be able to provide sustainability for the people and businesses in this area. Ultimately, a build-out, the South Florida Water Management District, including a lot of canal works in this area, is 2,100 miles of canals and almost 1,000 water control structures and culverts and pump stations, an amazing plethora of water control infrastructure for water supply, flood control, and now ecosystem restoration. Locally in Clewiston, we just recently finished a project to rebuild and actually relocate a flood control structure, the S169 structure, where we basically relocated it 2 miles to the west, which opened up 2 more miles of canal to access to Lake Okeechobee and some economic stimulus in Clewiston. Of course, we had to put a bridge there in order to be able to access the boat ramps on the Herbert Hoover Dike for lake access as well. So that project is now completed, and now we have upgraded new flood control structure and a bridge right here in this community as we work to maintain and sustain our mission for water supply, flood control, and ecosystem restoration in South Florida. By the way, all that infrastructure, we're 75 years old as a water management district, and now we're in the process of making sure we have another 75 years in front of us. So But really what, some of the things that we've talked about is the sustainability of Lake Okeechobee, the Everglades, and the estuaries. And as you know, as everyone knows, Governor DeSantis is very much on board with that and issuing mandates to the DEP and the district and all our agencies that he wants to do more for Florida's environment. And in his latest executive order, 2306, he highlighted not only the Everglades, but the estuaries and Lake Okeechobee and Indian River Lagoon to make progress on all of those fronts, which of course are all very important to the community we're in and the communities of South Florida. The outline of this restoration effort is being able to control the water more, get it to where it needs to be, and prevent it from getting to places when it doesn't need to be there. We don't want to flood things, we don't want to overdrain things, we want to manage it much better and so, to get it, the Lake Okeechobee controlled and the Everglades the water that it needs without sending it to the estuaries where it's not needed. And so yesterday, we celebrated how to get clean water to the Everglades, finishing the construction of the C-139 flow equalization basin here in Hendry County. I had flown over it a few times. I had been there at the groundbreaking, but it was really different being there in person and seeing that amazing resource that will be here in Hendry County with bass fishing, all kinds of recreational opportunities in the near future out there. And one of the things you may not know is STA 5-6 is a hub of recreational activity, whether it's bird watching, duck hunting, anything you want to do. No, not anything. A lot of things you may want to do out of the STA. It's very popular here. And now we'll have this other feature there and be able to send clean water to the Everglades, which is something that we're very proud of being able to accomplish. The other thing we celebrated nearby, south of here, is the beginning of the new stormwater treatment area associated with the EAA reservoir. We held a celebration about a year ago, and I was out there last Friday, and it was gorgeous. It's growing in, the equipment is gone. This is its final stages of construction. It looks like an STA, a very well-built STA, and it's going to be ready to be able to take these high lake levels and move that water through this STA into the Everglades when there's capacity in the Everglades to try to help manage high lake levels in Lake Okeechobee, which have been a struggle recently for everyone involved. So it was a very exciting day and a cornerstone of trying to get better control of our water resources. And then you take over near LaBelle in Hendry County, and you've got progress with a reservoir over there. That's the C43 reservoir, and that will be able to hold water from getting to the Caloosahatchee estuary in a damaging way, and it will be able to then have it for the Caloosahatchee estuary in the dry season to make sure that its salinity is sustained. I'm sitting there saying we're about 6 months to substantial completion on this thing. That was, I don't have to speak in years anymore. And that is wonderful, wonderful news. I look forward to celebrating the completion of that. We'll have to do some operational testing, filling it up slowly, making sure everything's working right. We're very confident that it will. But at some point in the future, we'll be able to open that up to recreation as well. Equestrian, trails, fishing, lots of opportunities out there on that 10,000 acre property. Very exciting within 2025 for Hendry County. But as you heard earlier, Lake Okeechobee is critically important to this area. And right now, with high lake levels that it has been experiencing over the past few years, we have lost a lot of submerged aquatic vegetation, which is the habitat for a lot of the fish spawning and helping produce clean water for the Everglades. So as you know, our scientists are out there weekly monitoring, trying to understand things better. Just recently, Florida Gulf Coast University held some public meetings to take input from the communities on how to sustain the habitat of Lake Okeechobee as we build out the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. The district, working with FWC, took it upon itself to put out a pilot to see if there was a way we could use turbidity curtains, inexpensive technology, to try to protect vegetation, protect it from some sediments, maybe some waves, to see if that would work. That's underway right now. It's deployed, and we're monitoring it to see if there's any difference that inexpensive technology that like this can provide as we're evaluating more opportunities to protect these habitats. The best way to protect these habitats is to help control lake levels, right? Which is the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program. That is, that is not happening next year, which is why we're looking at in-lake things this year. But so we, at the South Florida Water Management District, took it upon ourselves to get an above-ground reservoir planned and to Congress this year for authorization to hold another half a foot of water off of Lake Okeechobee on the north side of the watershed. This is the Lake Okeechobee Component A Reservoir. It'll hold, like I said, a half a foot. It was planned and delivered to the Corps in 1 year, and the Corps has approved it, and so it is up to Congress right now to authorize it. We've got very positive support from Congress. There are placeholders in the draft WRDA bills to try to get it into WRDA this year in 2024, which we're hopeful will happen in 2024. So good work to the staff. You can see them in the picture. You can see Mr. Butler there in the picture, just getting this thing submitted to the Corps, and they approved it in August. And then, of course, north of Lake Okeechobee is the underground storage, aquifer storage and recovery, which we're continuing to build out. We've done preliminary design on the demonstration facility so we can pump water at scale into the C38 South underground storage, aquifer storage and recovery systems, and we're drilling wells in 2 other clusters. All told, 10 clusters when they get built out following science and our permitting process, that could hold another half a foot off of Lake Okeechobee. So again, gaining control on those high lake levels. And then, of course, we want clean water in Lake Okeechobee, and restoring natural systems is a great way to get clean water in Lake Okeechobee. And this is the Kissimmee River Restoration Project, which is now online. Instead of having a water slide down into Lake Okeechobee carrying whatever it carries, now we have a meander working with the ecosystem, taking up nutrients before it gets to Lake Okeechobee. A few other wetland projects that are in planning under SERP on the lower left side, but getting that river restored is quite a remarkable feat that we were very proud to celebrate. And then some other local projects. We have Nicodemus Slough, which is a public-private partnership with the Likes company, which is 16,000 acres of shallow storage. We can pull off Lake Okeechobee, store it there, have it interact with the environment, and to return it back to Lake Okeechobee clean. A big project. It's also quite popular for birds, bird watching, and what was it, the snail kites, Miss Roman? No, not snail kites, swallowtail kites at Nicodemus Slough. Yep. Really pretty place, but helping Lake Okeechobee. And of course, that's not the only one. We do have on north side of the lake a lot more public-private partnerships with agricultural operations that were cattle or former citrus that now are holding water on their lands, letting it interact, delivering it back clean when it gets back there, but helping control high lake levels in Lake Okeechobee and doing their part to provide cleaner water to Lake Okeechobee. And then locally, we do have a new and expanding field station. We broke ground on that 2 days ago. It's an 80,000 square foot facility. The reason we needed this new field station for 2 reasons. One, it is our old one is not hurricane proof. It is quite old. If you've been there, you can tell it's not hurricane proof. This one will be 9-inch thick concrete walls. It will be able to sustain those impactful Cat 5 hurricanes and then be ready to do the flood control mission that we do post-hurricane after they pass. That is a 2.5-year, I think, construction process, maybe 2. But that needs to be expanded because we're going to have a new reservoir, 2 new reservoirs in our future that this field station takes care of. More STAs, we just have the new FEB, and some other Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Project features coming online, all managed by the Clewiston Field Station. So it's very exciting to have a new field station underway and getting built. And then, of course, locally, we do have a lot of recreational opportunities. I already talked about Stormwater Treatment Area 5-6. But we also have Ocalacuchee Slough Wildlife Management Area, which is 35,000 acres in Henry County that's available for bird watching, hiking, hunting opportunities, and a lot of incredible wildlife out there that's managed by the State Forest Service. So in conclusion, we talked about a lot of projects happening, but in 2025, it's gonna be a great year. Just for our ecosystem restoration efforts. First of all, we have our largest budget, $1.63 billion, that is going towards finishing that western reservoir, the C-43 reservoir. We're gonna be under construction, if I can get the permits from the Corps, under construction all the Indian River Lagoon reservoirs to help protect Indian River Lagoon in St. Lucie and Martin County. Clean water entering the Everglades with a new C-139 FEB online, and also that new EAA reservoir STA, so we can help manage lake levels to get water to the Everglades. We'll have all of the above-ground northern storage authorized. We'll have the southern storage under construction with the EAA reservoir, and we'll continue to build out the aquifer storage and recovery systems on the north side of the lake. And then once it's in the Everglades, getting it south out of Tamiami Trail, Bickey and Strand will be done over in Collier County, and of course all the Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands projects will be finished as well. But a lot happening in 2025 that we're very excited about, but I wanted to highlight some of the things we're doing locally, and that's my executive director's report, Mr. Chair.
No, thanks very much, Mr. Bartlett. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Mr. Bartlett? Thanks. It becomes very clear how important Henry County is to us. We're going to move now to our first public comment period. If you're here to comment on a specific agenda item, we ask that you hold your comment until we reach that item on our agenda. I think there's only one of them. This comment period is for general comments not related to agenda items. Public comments for consent agenda is 13 on the agenda, and public comment for discussion will be heard after the presentation. Is there any public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll hear first from Suzanne Martin, followed by Newton Cook.
Good morning, Governing Board. My name is Suzanne Martin, Executive Director of Anglers for Lake Okeechobee. First of all, I'd like to thank South Florida Water Management, Governor DeSantis, and of course everyone else that has had an intense focus on preserving the health of Lake Okeechobee. We are so very thankful, but as you know, we have a long way to go and some projects that need to happen immediately. We've been able to dodge a few bullets this hurricane season in that there's been a ton of excess water dropped on the lake, thank goodness. However, with any small change in direction of those storms, we could easily be sitting at an 18-foot lake, which would be devastating to the health of the lake and any future growth of vegetation. My husband, Scott, has been spending a lot of time on Lake O this past month and has seen some encouraging signs of some new SAV that is starting to pop up in key areas. Obviously, this started happening when the lake was at 13 to 14 feet, which are the stable levels to promote the grass. We're now sitting at a solid 16 feet and possibly more with the current storm out there dumping more water on the lake, which will knock back any progress that we've made. We are actually begging you to help us put Lake Okeechobee in recovery mode and do everything we can to focus on projects specifically in Lake O that will increase the vegetation and habitat on the lake. The other ask is that we get funding for the lake, an amount that we can pull from as need to promote the SAV growth and rebuild the habitat. Our surrounding communities deserve this, and our tourism depends on it. This is all we have in our community. This is what we all rely on. The other ask, or the last thing I wanted to mention, Newton Cook mentioned at the last meeting about Bass taking Lake O off the top 10 lakes in the country. This is so monumental. As long as I can remember, Lake O was number 1, sometimes number 2, and we absolutely threw our sucker in the dirt if we were number 3. Now we're not even ranked. I mean, we're not even up there. Nobody can even see us if they go to Bass, which most everybody does who loves to fish, to see, where are we gonna go? We're not there. a lot of these bass fishermen that come all the way down here and they bring their bass boats, they're not on their way to Miami and Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach just stopping off to wet a line. They actually specifically come all the way down here to fish this Great Lake. And this is where we are. I would just like to say that, you know, as much as I appreciate, and I do, I see everything that you guys are doing and how hard everybody is working, and I do see the pedal being pushed, I do. But we need the projects in the lake. We really do. We have got to specifically address our lake. And I just appreciate you guys.
Please wrap
And
up
I
your
wanted to say
comments.
one more thing. That wonderful man that you guys took a moment of silence for earlier was my brother, and I just want to thank you for honoring him today. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. We'll hear next from Newton Cook, followed by Mark Perry.
Good morning, Newton Cook, United Waterfowlers of Florida. I want to thank the district where we had a great recreation meeting. It was kind of hurricanes and all kind of made it a little bit less than normal, but it was still a good one, and we had some good topics. Also, I want to thank the district for the meetings that occurred here and in Okeechobee last week. I know that those meetings did not happen unless the district was involved. And I just appreciate the fact that sometimes things happen quietly when all of us are standing up here screaming. And I think the people who came to the meetings, facilitators found out exactly, although they said specifically they could not do very much about the levels. But the fact of the matter is we have a major problem on the lake is the levels of the lake, and that's the Corps of Engineers. We know that. We got it. But something has to be done about that, or the lake is going to die. We lost the bass fishing top 10 ranking. We had 5 hurricanes 20 years ago, and we didn't lose it. We got the Corps of Engineers running the water up and down too high, and we lost it. Okay? Now, what I'll call for is a task force that pays attention to one thing, and that's the health and the ecology of Lake Okeechobee. Meets 3 times a year. Go back and look at the old Lake Orac when the hurricanes flipped the lake 20 years ago. You'll see the Corps, the district, the FWC, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the agencies involved, and you will see the stakeholders. I happened to be one of them at the time, but Stewart, Clewiston, everybody had a spot, about 20 people. And the Corps and the district and the FWC had to make a presentation at each meeting on where they stood and what the projects were on the lake to improve the lake. Need to see that. Need to see that. It's 11,000 acres. FEB, when you see FEB, FEB1 is one of the greatest recreation places we have in South Florida today. It's a destination point for a lot of recreation, not just duck hunting, but birding, hiking, biking. It's an incredible place, and I hope this one will do the same thing. We can be hopeful. I hate to miss the ribbon cutting, but I had a big DU meeting I had to go to, and I don't like to drive a lot at night. I don't know what to tell you except for repeat. If we don't do something about Lake Okeechobee, the $20 billion we're spending is a waste of money, because the Lake Okeechobee is dirty. Everything in the system is going to be dirty, and you have to spend billions and billions of dollars to clean up the water that's coming out of the lake, when you could have clean water in the lake if you simply did one thing: keep SAV in the lake up to 40,000 acres. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. We'll hear next from Mark Perry.
Morning, Governing Board. Mark Perry, Florida Oceanographic. Clewiston brings back good memories. And back in 2017, I remember this room being the first PDT meeting we had for the LOSUM to get started, and it took 5 years, but we got that going. And then even prior to that, 2009, I remember being meetings in here about reviving the River of Grass. And those of you might remember at that time we were trying to look at how we could use land south of the lake and the EAA and try to revive the flows in the River of Grass. It was pretty exciting times. Drew did an excellent job reporting on all these great projects that are going on. You know, I know that completing the restoration strategies is going to be great. We'll meet the Q-Bell. I know that EA Reservoir and STAs functional, and even in the interim operating plan for STAs is going to help move water south from the lake, and completing C-43 and C-44 reservoirs and getting them operational functional is critical for both estuaries in the coastal. Storing water north of the lake is also critical through LOCAR and also the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project. So all those are great stuff. LACO is obviously in a lot of difficulty, and we've been keeping it for too deep for too long, and we've been losing the SAV. And we're all about recovering the lake and getting the lake back. We've got to be really considerate of that going forward. We're just starting LOSUM, and back in, you know, back in the early part of the years when we were having discharges from the lake into the estuaries, particularly St. Lucie side, we were getting some pretty damaging situations. Then those stopped, but in later time, later this year, in September, October, August, September, October, we started getting a lot of flows into the estuary in the St. Lucie side from the local basin. And those weren't coming from the lake, but we were getting 4,000 or 5,000 CFS coming into the St. Lucie and for months at a time, and it's really damaging. The water quality there, of course, is dependent on us implementing the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program. And you know, I know you're having a workshop on Monday. I'm going to give you a little handout about looking at those, all three watersheds, and how your data is showing that we're way over meeting our TMDLs and by BMAPs and BMPs. So we've got to get together and ask you to be a really, really forceful part, not only monitoring and showing us if we're achieving those goals, but also being able to get us there to be that lead of those three agencies. So I encourage you to help us within the watersheds to really restore the watershed north, south, east of the lakes, and west of the lake to be able to be viable and healthy again, including Lake Okeechobee. So thank you for having your meeting here today. It's very important, and it's a great place.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Chairman, we have no additional general public comment.
Thanks. We'll move now to board member comment. Mr. Butler, you want to start?
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, great to be in Clewiston. I've now spent 2 nights in Clewiston, and no, it has been a great visit. I got reminded we've had 5 events, counting today now, since we've been here, and appreciate the hospitality that's been shown. I'm sure I'll be jumping ahead of the rest of my board members here, but no, appreciate the hospitality by everybody. A couple things, you know, it's hard to be here and not talk about Lake Okeechobee. We've had Ms. Martin and, of course, Mr. Cook here talking about the health of Lake Okeechobee, and appreciative that the district has put out the barricades, again, trying to do things to help encourage SAV growth. The other thing we've got looming before us here with LOSUM is the recovery mode. And it sounds like all the triggers are tripped, and I would hope that the Corps would move forward with enacting it. I realize that, you know, with enacting it, that, you know, it goes against both water supply and some releases to our coastal estuaries. Again, those releases should be non-damaging type releases. And at Mitnick, I know your team will watch the water supply, and or Drew, your team, and I look towards Mitnick. But as we go into that, but getting that lake to a lower level, encouraging SAV growth, I would fully support, and hope my other board members would support us going into that recovery mode. next Tuesday, I don't know, Drew, if you mentioned in your report, but we got the Northern Everglades Estuary Protection Program update at the district on Tuesday, 9 o'clock, and give us, along with DEP, give us an update on the B-maps, where we are in Lake Okeechobee, Caloosahatchee, and St. Lucie B-maps. I look forward to those presentations and see the good stuff. Hopefully we're making progress. I haven't got a download of where we're at this year, but look forward to that update. Finally, as we go into the Thanksgiving season, somebody reminded me today, it just feels like we're going from October to Christmas. You see the local Walmart's already got Christmas decorations out before Halloween was over, and they were upset that we're missing out on Thanksgiving. As we go into the Thanksgiving season, a week before Thanksgiving, my community, and I believe other communities around, have celebrated the Farm City Week, which is the Thursday before Thanksgiving up to the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And for us, that is a celebration of the relationship between our communities and our farming operation. And it's important for us as we reflect on that to understand that relationship. And of course, with Water Management District having our meeting here in Clewiston, we get reminded of our relationship between water, farming, and then the consumers. And I want to just bring that to the forefront, ask that, again, as we go into Thanksgiving, keep an open mind of that relationship. And it's not just about abundant food sources, but our farms are also a great help and necessity to our natural resources. The open spaces, the aquifer recharge, removing nutrients, leaving our water cleaner than it was before. We've had the EAA report again this year, again successes more than double, over a 25% removal. Our dispersed water management projects, the relationship that our farms and ranches provide, again, it's not just about the food production, but it's also the open spaces and natural resource protection. And I just ask that you keep that in mind as we go into Thanksgiving. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Colonel Rowan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's really great to be here this morning. I'm not a stranger to Clewiston. I seem like I make a lot of trips this way. I enjoy coming to the town, and I want to thank the city and the chamber for last night's reception. It's been wonderful hospitality. I loved being able to be a part of the groundbreaking for the new field station. I mean, what a big deal. And to move it closer into town and put it right in the heart of the city, it's just all good. Plus the ribbon cutting for the C-139 flow equalization basin. I mean, this has been an incredible trip, not like my normal trips, right? And I got to relax, walk along the dike of Lake Okeechobee, see some of the areas, just take it all in. One of the things that I did want to highlight in my remarks today is an article that appeared in the Florida Specifier September-October issue. In this particular issue, it talked about a subject near and dear to my heart, which is the wave attenuation devices that they're using up in the Tampa area for the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. And it's a great article, September-October issue, not the current issue, the one right before. And it talked about this project, and I'd like to offer that suggestion to my fellow board members to take a look at it if you haven't seen it. It must be about 2 years ago, Commissioner Raymond Iglesias and Scott Martin invited me to go out on Lake Okeechobee and come out and see what's going on here in Clewiston. And I was at the ribbon cutting for the Herbert Hoover Dike, and we were all celebrating, and Raymond approached me and invited me. And I took him up on it, and I took them up on it, and I spent the day with them out on Lake Okeechobee, Coot Bay. From that, my interest grew, and the collaborations grew. And James Erskine and his scientists at the Fish and Wildlife Commission joined us on the next trip. And we talked science, and we talked what can we do to improve the health of the lake and what's possible. And my approach to the topic was the sky's the limit. Let's just brainstorm. Let's just figure out what we can do. And so we threw some ideas around. And then the next trip, we added another partner. We added Florida Gulf Coast University scientists. So now it's South Florida Water Management District, the local commissioner, and then FWC and their scientists, and now FGCU scientists. So we're all in the airboats all together collaborating in the middle of the lake in the Coot Bay area, right out of Clewiston. And we're trying to put our heads together on what is it that we can do to actually take that baby step in this area for a pilot project to do something for the health of the lake. And James Erskine's here today, and in talking with him, I understand that this has progressed to the public meetings, and the idea of a Lake Okeechobee task force has been discussed at some of those meetings. And as you know, I'm from Collier County, and we have Lake Trafford. It's not a Lake Okeechobee, it's a much smaller lake, but we have a lake management plan, and there's a task force that oversees that Lake Trafford Management Plan. It has all the smart folks represented from all of the stakeholders and all of the agencies that come together and figure out what to do. But one of the thoughts that we have kicked around, and we talked about it, is could we use something like these wave attenuation devices to somehow look at a small area in Coot Bay that we could see if the collection from the wave action naturally could give us the habitat necessary to increase the amount of submerged aquatic vegetation. And would the wave attenuation devices also create like an artificial reef type of approach that could improve the habitat as well? I'm not a scientist, but all I know is I got all of the smart folks out there in a couple of airboats, and it sounded very positive to me. The key is, though, is taking that next step, and that's always the hardest part. With all the ideas, all the great science, all of those things, to like, can we just test something? This might be either the dumbest idea or the smartest idea that we might come up with. But I think there's an opportunity there, and I just want to share that since I'm in Clewiston now at an official meeting, to put that on the record, because I know James has been just tremendous with FWC and being open to this. He's explained to me, you know, what the steps that are necessary. He's been just a great partner. James, thank you for everything and all your scientists. FGCU, when I talked to Dr. Tolley, who's in charge of the water school, and I talked to him about his science team and what we can bring together, everyone has collaborative ideas, and they're all talking to each other. And that says to me we can work with each other, and we can move something forward, and the agency, of course, South Florida Water Management District. So I throw that out there. I hope that we keep moving this forward, and I'd like to see us test something fairly soon to at least look at what is possible to address the health of the lake. And it may not be a ribbon cutting or a groundbreaking, but I got to tell you, I'll be there. Okay, I will be there when we start something in Coot Bay to test to improve the environment. And I hope we can make that happen. And I probably talked enough, so that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Colonel Roman.
Mr. Steinle?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I also want to thank Hendry County and Clewiston for hosting us. It's a pleasure to be here. I think, Charlotte, a lot of what you said makes sense. I think we all want to support and are heavily in support of improving, safeguarding the ecology of the lake. I think as we look at recovery, given this would be the first time we use it in LOSUM, the challenge is really striking a balance. And that's what we learn every time we have to sort of weigh costs and opportunities. So looking forward to discussing that more, but recognize that not just for the state, but for this local community, for all the communities around the lake, that the ecology of the lake is primary to your economy, to your tourism industry, to people's livelihoods. So I think it's so important that we get this right. I also want to comment that I had the opportunity to visit one of our recent projects, the S-191 project, which is out in Taylor Creek, Nubbin Slough, which is a hotspot for nutrients. And the S-191 Innovative Technology and Water Quality Project, the objective is to remove phosphorus from that area because it's one that's been identified as being a heavy load area. So this project is estimated to take out about 3.5 tons of phosphorus a year, and it's done through a filtration process or a system that removes the nutrients and then exports it to landfill, so it doesn't come back into the system. But I guess the most important mention is that this is a pay-for-performance project. It's one of many, or it's one of many in a program of pay-for-performance that I hope we continue to consider. In this case, the company invests in the technology and the resources and sets up the system for on-site treatment, and the district pays for the amount of phosphorus being removed. So a pretty cost-effective, when running efficiently, a pretty cost-effective way, in addition to other tools that we have from the water quality perspective to reduce load in the system. So this, I want to thank again. We've probably thanked the governor, the legislature, and DEP, 3 or 4 years ago for this budget, for not just this project, but in general, funding innovative technologies. But I think this is one that I'm certainly interested in continuing this type of program, innovative technology in general, and pay for performance, and onboarding similar projects. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Steinle. Mr. Bergeron.
Well, it's a great honor to be here in Henry County. My family has been in Florida for 8 generations, and a great part of that time has been around Lake Okeechobee. My great-grandparents and grandparents lived on the northern rim of Lake Okeechobee, just east of Taylor Creek, between Barlow's Fishing Camp and fished on this lake back in the late 1800s. So it's a big honor for us. We have a beautiful natural ranch in Henry County that our family lives on half the time. And it's just an honor to be here. I'd like to recognize my daughter, which is the vice president of the Bergeron Everglades Foundation, which is the next generation to make sure that we have a quality of life in Florida, clean water. The journey of water is the life of Florida, from sawgrass to seagrass. And we have a lot on our plate. I can say that we've made tremendous progress under the leadership of our governor and legislators. And I just can't say how proud I am of South Florida Water Management staff. As I've sat here for the past 5 years, it's amazing, and our board is very blessed to have such dedicated employees working on the largest environmental restoration in the history of the world ever attempted. And So in saying all that, I want to thank Drew and myself attended the task force working group. And I want to thank James Erskine, which is the chair, as they recommend to the task force. And I want us to all focus on, every project that we're doing is so important. And we've had 70 ribbon cuttings and projects completed, and they're all great projects moving forward. But I want everyone to really focus on, to get the benefit of what we've built north of the Tamiami Trail. And as one of the speakers mentioned, the high water in the lake, we have to focus on the Tamiami Trail as a high priority. Sitting here today, the lake is above schedule. The Central Everglades is closed to the public, and it's above schedule. And moving water beyond the Tamiami Trail will benefit this whole global system. And I know I bring this up nearly at every meeting because I believe, as a civil engineering construction for 60 years, that is one of the most important projects to move forward. And all of our stakeholders at every meeting, that's all I hear is move water south. So it's important that we highly prioritize the Blue Shanty. It's the last piece on the eastern side of Shark River Slough that will deliver the 60% of 2.5 million acre feet of water to Florida Bay. And as we continue to go forward, and I may talk a little more about this when we get into John's presentation, it's important that, and I believe, Drew, that we should have quarterly workshops on all of the various barriers that have to be resolved. Everyone is focused on the road. The road will be finished based upon the schedule I just received last week in March of '26. That's 15 months away. That allows us to elevate the L29 and move that 60% of 2.5 million acre feet into Shark River Slough, subject to us getting the Blue Shanty highly prioritized. The western side, we have to address the closure of the S12s for us to deliver that 40% on the west side of Shark River Slough on into Lossman Slough and to the 10,000 Islands across the whole face. When we're moving this water compatible with the environment and the plant communities, we are benefiting the Central Everglades, the Big Cypress Preserve, Fakahatchee, Picayune, the Panther Refuge, and Everglades National Park, that whole global system. And we're minimizing the water levels that Lake Okeechobee has impacts. And it benefits the rivers. Because if the water don't go south, and that's all I hear for 6 years sitting here, move water south, it's gonna be in the lake, or it's gonna go in discharges greater than natural, which affects seagrass in our estuaries in the Gulf and the Atlantic. And at the same time, the lack of water in Florida Bay, seagrass dies, like 2015, 50,000 acres of seagrass. These are examples. So we have to work with DOT, continue to get this road completed. We need to be working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the captive breeding relocation of the Cape Sable sparrow to allow that 40% of 2.5 million acre feet flow on the western side by gravity, naturally. And so I think it's important that the airboat tours on the south side, Drew, we need to make sure they're ready for SERP and modified water delivery. These are all things outside of the road that we have to work on to make sure that when that road is elevated and the Blue Shanty is highly prioritized, that we're moving this 2.5 million acre feet up to 2.5 million acre feet to Florida Bay, minimize drowning the wildlife, drowning the Miccosukee, and high water events in the lake. And so I'm looking forward to work with all the stakeholders and our staff to make that connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Butler, you wanted to amend something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My phone blew up as soon as my comments ended. I misspoke. I got some dates wrong. The NEP update is Monday at 9 o'clock at district headquarters, and then DEP starts their BMAP updates Tuesday through Thursday. Roadshow throughout, so I just wanted to get that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for clearing that up. I'd also like to thank the City of Clewiston and Henry County for your incredible hospitality. I love your historic museum in Clewiston. I want to recommend it highly to anyone who hasn't been there, and if you have been there, go back. It's well worth it. You're going to learn something every time. I'd like to thank Sean Hamilton, who just left DEP secretary as DEP secretary. He was really, really good person to work with and took everything we did very seriously. It was incredibly helpful to us in Tallahassee. So a lot of the progress we see happening right now is a result of Sean's hard work, and I appreciate that and look very much forward to working with Alexis Lambert in that position now. I'd also like to thank Carson Turner, who was a Henry County Commissioner for, I think, 16 years. He just left that post, and he's also been wonderful to work with, and thank him for his service to the county and to the state. I also want to thank our staff, and I say this a lot, but I mean it a lot. You all do so much. I'm a little bit hurricane wary. Actually, I'm a lot hurricane wary, and you all continue to work and continue to do everything you do, and all the progress we have continues in spite of the fact that we're just getting pummeled with hurricanes, and you're also dealing with those. And to that crew that went to Tampa to help out, I was almost in tears listening to that, because that it means so much to the people on the ground there, and thank you. It makes me proud to be part of this organization. This month I've had a chance to visit the EAA SDA, which was really incredible. I hadn't seen it since the ribbon cutting, and it's wow, there's a lot of wildlife there. I never seen so many gators. Saw some roseate spoonbill, saw some wood stork, saw a bunch of other birds. I don't know what they were, but it was really, really fun to be there. Also, the C-43 Reservoir Project, got a chance to visit that, and that is just amazing to me how quickly that has come along once it was properly managed, and I give our staff a lot of credit for that. The C-139 FEB, the Clewiston Field Station, both of those are nice, really good feel-good events that shows progress. One thing, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I was leaving my house yesterday, and my wife's like, "Hey, where are you going today?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm going over to the C-139 flow equalization basin ribbon cutting." And she just gives me this look. I'm like, "Okay." So I started wondering, why our stuff sounds like medical procedures. Maybe we could rename some of these things so that they're a little more public friendly, and that's something, maybe that's heresy. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it's just an observation that C-139 FEB just doesn't roll off the tongue, and it really deserves better than that. I mean, when you look at that area, it's phenomenal, and it's going to be such a good recreation area for Henry County that it would be nice to come up with maybe some other names, but it's not a priority. It's just an observation. So with that, we'll move on to consent, and I'll ask any board members if you have any items you want to move to consent agenda for discussion. I'm hearing none. Is there public comment on consent?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll hear from Mark Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Perry. We're just 3 items on the consent. We just want to comment on. Item 18 is the land acquisition up at Shingle Creek at the headwaters of the Everglades. I think any kind of land acquisition up there to help protect that headwaters is great. Item 22 is the USGS and groundwater monitoring efforts. We need absolutely to continue on those hundreds of stations that they monitor for groundwater, particularly with saltwater intrusion in our lower East Coast areas. And then also the item 26, the Palomar lands up in Martin County area. That settlement agreement helps to extend our reach into restoring those Palomar lands. As you know, in the IRL South, there are over 90,000 acres put aside for natural land storage and treatment within the IRL South. That included Cypress Creek, Palomar, and one more, I can't remember. There are the three areas anyway. Yalapata, that's correct. And we have been participating to try to get those all settled out, but appreciate all those inputs and moving forward on those particular items. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Chairman, we have no additional public comment on this item.
Thanks, Mark. I'm now going to recognize our General Counsel, Mary Cruz Fincher, and she's going to announce a attorney-client session.
Good morning, governing board members. If you see me swat, there is a wasp just a few inches away from this microphone, so that's what's going on. Good morning to you all.
Do you want to use the other one?
It's okay, I think.
All right.
He's good. He's good, crawling towards me.
We have an understanding.
So at this time, I'd like to request advice from the governing board concerning a litigation matter. The advice I'm requesting will assist in settlement negotiations or in strategy related to litigation expenditures, or both. The advice I'm requesting concerns the litigation in the Be a Man, Buy Land LLC case, which is consent agenda item 26. This session will be recorded by a court reporter. No portion of that session will be off the record. At the conclusion of the litigation, the transcript of this session shall be made part of the district's public record.
Thanks. The governing board session will now adjourn to the attorney-client session. The subject matter of the session shall be confined to settlement negotiations or strategy related to litigation expenditures in this case. The persons attending the attorney-client session are governing board members, myself, Mr. Goss, Mr. Bergeron, Mr. Butler, Ms. Roman, Mr. Steinley, Executive Director Drew Bartlett, General Counsel Mary Cruz Fincher, District Attorney Judith Levine, and the court reporter. The session's expected to last no more than 60 minutes. I expect it's going to take less than 60 minutes, so you can either stay here and hang out or not, but we don't expect it to take the full hour. So we're adjourned for now.
Why don't you just call them in, Chauncey? Use your overhead voice to call them in.
The attorney-client session has concluded. The governing board meeting is now resumed. In the session, we discussed settlement negotiations and/or strategy related to litigation expenditures. We're going to return now to the consent agenda. Is there any board member who wants to move any items from the consent agenda to a discussion? Hearing none, can I have a motion to second, and a motion and a second to approve consent?
I'll make a motion.
I have
I'll
a motion.
second.
I have a motion and a second for consent 16 to 27. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'm going to call that question. Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Steinle?
Yes.
I'm going to vote yes. Colonel Roman?
Yes.
Thanks. And Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Thanks. That passes unanimously. We'll go now to the discussion agenda. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Stacy Paisno. I'm a lead project manager with the Water Supply Bureau, and I'm also the Cooperative Funding Program Manager. And today we're going to be discussing the upcoming FY26 application process. And at the end of the presentation today, I have one resolution for you to consider. So Governor DeSantis signed an executive order 2306 that requested continued recurring annual funding for alternative water supply development. The governor and the legislature have recognized the importance of these projects in the protection of Florida's natural systems, and over the last 5 legislative sessions have allocated $310 million statewide towards these projects. In May of this year, the governing board approved our FY25 project list, and we hope to hear something in the near future regarding those projects. In anticipation of FY26 funding becoming available, we have outlined a tentative schedule that we would release an application on December 2nd. In January, we're going to conduct 2 informational Zoom webinars that will be recorded and posted on our SFWMD TV YouTube channel. Our application is going to close on February 26th, and then during March and April of next year, we will be reviewing all of the applications that have been received. And in May, I will be coming back to you with a proposed project list for approval to submit to DEP by the end of May. There are 2 different project types under our cooperative funding program. The first is alternative water supply, and that's to increase water supplies through development of non-traditional water resources and/or storage. Types of projects that we funded in the past are brackish water wells, reverse osmosis plants, reclaimed water facilities and expansions, reclaimed water transmission lines, aquifer storage and recovery, and other source types. For water conservation, we're looking for any project that uses hardware or technology to increase water use efficiency and result in demand reductions. Types of projects that we funded in the past include high-efficiency indoor plumbing retrofits or rebates, automatic line flushing devices, and irrigation upgrades such as soil moisture sensors. As a recap, the district's been funding cooperative projects for over 2 decades. To date, under the cooperative funding program is the Alternative Water Supply Program, which was established in 1997. And to date, we have funded approximately $256 million for 534 projects, which is going to create 523 million gallons per day of capacity. That is more than the combined Lower West Coast planning area public supply use, which was 149 million gallons per day. And the Lower West Coast planning supply area includes all of Lee County, most of Collier County, portions of Charlotte, Glades, Hendry, and Monroe counties, and the Seminole Tribe of Florida, Immokalee Reservation. For our water conservation program, it was established in 2002, and we've funded approximately $9.2 million for 267 projects. which is going to estimate water savings of 13.9 million gallons per day. That is more than double the public water supply use for Glades County and Hendry County combined, which is only 4.62 million gallons per day. As part of this program, since we are in the city of Clewiston, I went back into our historical records, and the city of Clewiston received a little over $5.6 million as part of this program for the construction of the Clewiston Reverse Osmosis Water Treatment Plant in 2006 and 2007. That created 3 million gallons of new capacity, so the water you're drinking here is from that plant. And on the screen, I did find a photo of the injection well that we helped fund back in 2007. As part of our funding guidelines, we go by some of the DEP funding criteria, and they ask that the districts provide a prioritized list every year of projects with the following considerations: that those projects provide regional benefits, they support an MFL water body if applicable, any additional benefits such as water quality, flood protection, etc. Projects need to be shovel-ready and have funding available, and they have to have undergone some sort of cost-benefit analysis. In addition to the DEP guidelines, the district also has considerations that we use, and we want projects that support ocean outfall, which is the reduction of discharging treated wastewater, green infrastructure if applicable, resource-limited areas, and projects that support our water supply plans. For any new reclaimed water facilities or treatment expansions of those facilities that include higher levels of water quality treatment, we're considering those very favorably. For water conservation, additional requirements are that we look at the water source that's being conserved, what the quantity of water being saved is, and the cost effectiveness of those projects. Every year, we try and improve our application process and our guidelines to assist our partners in submitting the best application possible for the review process. Historically, the governing board priorities have been that projects need to be within our district boundaries or have a benefit directly to our district. It needs to be an alternative water supply or a water conservation project. These are only for construction or implementation. We do not fund engineering, design, pilot projects, and so forth. Previously, the governing board approved to include the irrigation rule status as part of the eligibility requirements, and it was very successful. And in November of 2022, the governing board approved a new eligibility requirement that local governments must have an approved water supply facilities work plan per statutory requirements, which took effect during last year's fiscal year 25 application cycle. So for the FY26 application cycle, we are requesting consideration of a resolution to clarify the expectation of local governments regarding the status of their water supply facilities work plans, where we want them to have a current approved document. So staff is seeking to clarify the eligibility requirement for the water supply facilities work plan status for local governments in our cost share process. So Mr. Chair, I will turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Stacy. Is there any public comment on this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We'll hear from Caitlin Newcamp.
Thank you, Stacy, for the presentation, and thank you, governing board members, for the opportunity to comment. Caitlin Newcamp with Audubon, Florida. Audubon, Florida supports the district's use of alternative water supply sources, but stresses the continued need to protect Florida's wetlands and wildlife habitats. Environmental impact assessments must rigorously evaluate these projects as alternative water supplies like wastewater reuse and desalination raise water quality concerns. Contaminants such as treated effluents could harm ecosystems if not managed with high standards for phosphorus and nitrogen. Advanced wastewater treatment and consistent monitoring are essential to prevent contamination of sensitive habitats, including our precious Everglades. In addition, it's important that the district and DEP ensure that alternative water supply projects are sustainable in the long term. For example, desalination requires substantial energy, and brine can harm marine ecosystems. And of course, climate resilience is an important factor. So we ask you to use an integrated approach that considers all environmental consequences and adaptability to shifting precipitation patterns when evaluating proposed large-scale projects. Finally, we call for a stronger emphasis on water conservation within the overall alternative water supply strategy. Focusing on efficient water use and conservation incentives can reduce new infrastructure needs. For instance, replacing turf grass on district properties with native plants, along with encouraging similar practices on private lands, would significantly cut water demand. We ask the district to consider education and outreach programs to encourage residents to plant native plants and ground cover to reduce the overall water demand. So we ask you to ensure that the alternative water supply strategy projects are sustainable, scientifically sound, and integrated within a framework that prioritizes ecosystem health. A balanced approach that addresses both human and ecological needs will protect Florida's natural resources while enhancing water security. And we are encouraged to see this initiative moving forward and look forward to its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newcamp. Mr. Chairman, we have no additional public comment.
Thanks. We'll go now to board questions and discussion. Colonel Roman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Stacy, thank you for the excellent presentation. I have a couple of questions. One is to follow up on the year-round irrigation ordinances. I know that this board, when we first got together, and I know Mr. Steinle had this area of interest as well as some other board members as far as the irrigation ordinance, and we've made a lot of progress with getting local officials to adopt such an ordinance. Where do we stand right now with that program?
So right now, we have 122 local governments with acceptable ordinances. There's 9 that are working to adopt.
How many working to adopt? I'm sorry, I missed that.
9 that are working. We have 12 that we consider reluctant to adopt, and 12 who have declined to adopt, for a total of 155.
Okay. So you're still continuing to work with those that want to adopt an irrigation ordinance, obviously?
Yes, ma'am. Our water conservation analyst is working, and she reaches out to them and gets regular updates on that.
Okay. How do we handle the rain cutoff devices? Is that only on new irrigation systems? How do we encourage local governments or local homeowners to make sure they have an operational rain cutoff device?
I'm not entirely sure. I know that where I used to live, it was part of our code that we had to have an irrigation cutoff device, but I would have to research that and get back with you.
Okay, that's something that can save a lot of water, especially in the rainy season, and we have some, part-time residents that are gone during that time of the year, and, a rain cutoff device could keep them from watering when it's pouring down rain outside, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's just something that I'd like to maybe see you take a look at and see how we can help educate or do outreach for that. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. Anyone? Mr. Steinle?
I do just have a quick follow-up. Just interested to know, is there a typical reason for the 12 that have declined to participate, or are they, pretty varied?
Some, it may be that they're really small communities. One that I know of is a really small community, so it doesn't make sense for them to do it. But for the rest of them, I would have to get with our water conservation analyst and follow up with you offline.
I think from what I remember, a lot of it had to do with this expectation of compliance or enforcement, that is. And I think, I don't know, I'm just imagining that would be the predominance of reason why one would decline is if they didn't understand that, or if they thought that they had to put this policy out and were obligated to enforce it. Clearly, we want enforcement, but I don't think it's an obligation, right? I think direction helps, policy helps, you know, sort of advice for homeowners when they install irrigation helps. So maybe that's one thing we can look at, is just clarifying, you know, for those smaller communities who can't afford enforcement, that, you know, advice or not rules, advice or recommendations could be as effective.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe we could have some of that information come back to us, you know, to see what, you know, because we've been looking at this every year for over 5 years, right? And so maybe those, I don't know if the communities have grown through the educational outreach part or what, but that's a good point that you raised, Jay.
But we have made progress, and that list is a lot shorter than it was, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. One last question is mostly for eligibility. It's who is eligible for this? Because I want to make sure as many people are applying as should be.
For the entire program?
Yeah.
So anyone that is a public or private water user can apply for this funding.
Okay, when you say private water user, does that mean me?
So if you lived in an HOA, your HOA could apply, but an individual homeowner could not.
Okay.
So we're targeting or a nonprofit, someone that's coming in to do some sort of, they're retrofitting an entire building. They want to change out all of their indoor plumbing, and they want to also do an irrigation retrofit of their facility. Or if you're in an HOA where they want to come in and retrofit all the irrigation system because it's an older
Okay, so
master.
private entities can apply.
Private entities
That's what I
can
wanted to
apply.
make sure people understood, is that
Yes.
this is a really great program that's out there, and
Yep, we've had ag, we've had nonprofits, we've had education, and a lot of local governments.
if you had a private golf course, could you apply?
Yes.
Okay.
We actually had one of them that we just closed out from over in this area in Lee County.
Thanks. I just, again, it's just making sure people understand that this money's out there, and we'd love to see them try and get it. If there's no other questions or discussion, I'll take a motion on the resolution.
Make the motion.
Mr. Bergeron and Mr. Steinle with the second. Further discussion? I'm hearing none. Call the question. Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Thanks. Colonel Norman?
Yes.
I'm going to vote yes. Mr. Steinle?
Yes.
And Mr. Bergeron?
Yes.
Thanks. That passes unanimously.
you.
Thanks, Stacy. We'll go now to technical reports. Mr. Mitnick, Mr. Glenn.
All right. So if we look back at the month of October, you can see it was just a little bit less than an inch of surplus rainfall over the entire district. But mostly how that played out was, as you can imagine, with the passage of the storm, it was mostly up in the upper chain, up in north of Lake Okeechobee or around Lake Okeechobee. You can see there on the left-hand side of the graphic that for the most part, the southern portion of the system remained relatively dry for the past so far this month here in November. So we haven't gotten that much rain, and I'll talk a little bit more about the anticipated rains as we move deeper into the dry season. But how that has resulted in lake levels in the upper chain of lakes, starting there up in the upper right-hand side with East Lake. As I talked about last month, our operating objective in the wake of the storm that passed was to bring all of the lakes in the upper chain in right at their winter pool. So you can see the traces along the way there that pretty much aligns with that operational philosophy. So all of the lakes, East Lake, West Lake, and even it plays out in Lake Estapoga there in the bottom left. They've all brought in right at their winter pools for this time of year. So there's a decent amount of water in each of those lakes to carry on through the dry season. As we jump up and we look at Lake Kissimmee in the upper left-hand side, you can see we had it right there at regulation schedule, but consistent with increment 1, we have still maintained the flows down the restored reaches of the Kissimmee River to maintain the health of that riverine system. And Lawrence, why don't you tell us how we're doing with that?
Okay, looking at the Kissimmee River floodplain inundation, and you look across the seasons, at about 1,400 CFS is the flow we need coming down the river. There's a stage elevation discharge relationship that water is going to start stacking up in the river and moving laterally out onto the floodplain at about 1,400 CFS. So you see that over the past several months, we've had really good inundation of the floodplain. When you look at the graph on the top, that dotted line is that 1,400 CFS. And the green shaded area is the duration that we have had floodplain inundation. So we're at about 53 days or so for this inundation event. In a typical year, with restoration complete, you would expect that to be about 150 to 180 days. That's what we're shooting for. But remember that we were keeping water levels low on the floodplain this past year to complete construction on the S69 Weir. And with the storms that came through, when we have water that comes really quickly into the river, we had a pretty precipitous drop in dissolved oxygen. But as the flows get to reestablish and become a little more general, you get a response that's been good, and we're back above the stressed or lethal range for fish and other aquatic organisms that require oxygen in the water column.
So looking more about how water has moved around the upper portion of the system, you can see that right about here, Lake Okeechobee inflows have been just over 1.3 million acre feet of water has been moved into Lake Okeechobee from the upper basin. And then looking over at the Caloosahatchee, about just a little less than 1.3 million acre feet of water has been moved to the estuary. That was predominantly made up of basin runoff from the couple storm events, and then only about a little less than 200,000 acre feet originated back over here in Lake Okeechobee. Over on the East Coast, little less than 100,000 acre feet of basin runoff from the C44 basin moving to the St. Lucie estuary, just over 200,000 acre feet from C23-24 basins into the St. Lucie estuary, and then a little bit more than 100,000 acre feet coming out of C25 going to the Indian River Lagoon around the Fort Pierce area. So taking a look at Lake Okeechobee, you can see today we're right there, right around 16.09 feet, so just over 16 feet. And generally, if we follow this middle trace, the red trace, that's the 50th percent probability. So coming out here to June 1st, what this will tell you is roughly, given the climatic conditions that we expect over the next several months in the dry season, that under normal operations, we would land somewhere around, just eyeballing that in, around 13.5 feet on June 1st. Now, I know last month we had a discussion about recovery operations and what that meant. You've heard a couple comments here already this morning. So the district is interested in pursuing recovery operations for this dry season. So we'll be engaging with the Corps of Engineers over the course of the next week or so as they go through their decision-making process, and hoping to, at least from our perspective, potentially implement those recovery operations as early as this month in November. Now, having said that, under Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual, there is a mid-season check-in. So district staff will obviously continue to monitor the system status, monitor the progress that is being made if recovery operations are decided to be implemented by the Corps of Engineers. And sometime after the first of the year, we'll get together and assess the system conditions and make a determination whether or not continued recovery operations would be successful in meeting the goals of what those operations are intended to meet. So at this point in time, as I think Mr. Butler said in his comments, all of the indicators are pointing towards implementing recovery operations. And we're very interested in pursuing those operations at this point in time. So Lawrence, talk to us about why would we be implementing those recovery operations and the ecology of the lake right now.
Sure. So we're looking at inflows into the lake in this graph, and this over on this side, orange, and this is definitely a gators type of thing. Americruise. We've got orange are the inflows and blue are the outflows, and we've had a lot of water coming into the lake for a long period of time that we haven't been able to get water out of the lake. And really the main way to get water out of the lake currently during this time of the year was to go out the Caloosahatchee, and you've had 2 hurricanes that have come across the Caloosahatchee, and that basin is really large, and so it's been taking care of its own runoff. But we finally gotten to a position where that basin runoff has subsided, and the Army Corps is actually able to begin pulse releases to the Caloosahatchee. So when we come down and we look at what our lake stage is now, I think we have kind of hit that peak from the wet season, starting to recede into the dry season. When you look over at the right-hand side, those graphics, 1610 is probably about 1.15 today is the current stage. And you're seeing along the marsh those greens and blues, and that's showing that the marsh is fully inundated. So how stage relationship works with the marsh, when you have water levels that are at 15 feet, that is when water is pushed all the way out through the marsh and has hit the levee. So anything above 15, you're going to start stacking water in the marsh. So you have basically the edge of the marsh is at about a stage of 12, and the levee is at about 15. So when we're at 16, you have definitely a lot more water in the marsh than when you get down to 15, and then it changes as you gradually come down. So what we're seeing, and I'll get to the SAV here, is these last several years, we haven't gotten below 13. So we're going to see in a slide or two the significance of that for submerged aquatic vegetation. This is it showing the recovery envelope? I'll just keep going. This will probably be the last time I bring the cyanobacterium bacteria distribution and intensity to you this season. I would say that we're officially done with the season for this year. We've hit a temperature that's below 25 degrees Celsius. We get into cooler temperatures. We don't see the blooms. Definitely small blooms can happen, but not large, intense blooms during the season. And we ramp down in November from our bi-monthly sampling to once-a-month sampling, just to have a good period of record of data to evaluate trends in blue-green algae. So here you see that we've gotten below that 25-degree line, and winds have not been too crazy this time of year, but we're out of the blue-green algae season per se. Looking at snail kite nesting this past year, the lake has had a pretty tremendous nesting effort, but not a highly successful nesting effort. So if we look here, we see Lake Okeechobee over this last year has had about 100 nests on it, 35 of those being successful. They're not the best parents at fledging, but still a lot of effort, and the predominant effort statewide is in Lake Okeechobee. One of the reasons we're seeing that is because these birds are nomadic, and they go to where conditions are most favorable for them, and it's really based on their food source. And the apple snail is their primary food source. And on Lake Okeechobee, we've had kind of a change in dynamic between abundance of the exotic apple snail and the native apple snail. And the native apple snail only nests once a year. It only produces like 40 eggs per clutch, whereas the exotic will nest all year long. It produces, up to almost 1,000 eggs in a clutch, and it's there and it's abundant, and the birds know it's there. So that's why we've seen such a tremendous nesting on the lake. And they also have a protracted nesting season now than they used to. They used to nest from about February to June, and that was it. Now we see a second season after water levels have come up on the lake because there's just such an abundant food source for them to take advantage of. So Lake Okeechobee has been just a really great place for snail kites to nest over the past several years. And it's really tied to the number and densities of the exotic snail on the lake. Looking at submerged aquatic vegetation, Drew showed this slide earlier. And in a typical, the target for submerged aquatic vegetation on the lake is 35,000 acres. Currently, we're at 3,750 acres, so that's not a lot. And you see this downward trend, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, and that's associated with those water levels that I showed you that have not gotten below 13. So as we look forward and we're saying, you know, recovery mode, what does that mean? It means getting the lake down to about 12, if possible, for 90 days, so that you have shallower water levels, that turbidity falls out during the summer because the winds stop and you get clearer water, and you have the ability, the light to penetrate, to hit the bottom sediment for vegetation to grow. That is the basis for recovery from SAV standpoint. And SAV is extremely important to Lake Okeechobee's ecology. It serves as nursery ground for the fishery, absolutely important there. It also competes with blue-green algae for nutrients in the system. So it's a very important feature to try to recover on the lake. SAV is very resilient. It's a plant. As long as it has the conditions that are necessary, it can rebound really quickly. I got a text on Monday, and I'll read it to you. It says, "Hey, I found a bunch of eelgrass on the lake. Super encouraging. It's healthy and new, not old from last year." Oh, by the way, it's Scott. It was Scott Martin. He was reaching out to say, you know, he's on the lake so often. And he was really encouraged to see that just recently, you know, along with what our sampling here is showing, that there is healthy SAV there. It's just not abundant, and it needs the conditions that are appropriate for it to be able to do really well. And that's where recovery would help. That operation would help SAV recovery. Here is the sampling that we do, and all those white lines on the left-hand side, those are transects going out into the lake. So if you come over and you look at this graphic over here, you're looking at 8 feet is going to be lakeward, 12 feet, where's my cursor? 12 feet is going to be this periphery where it's along the edge. So what those graphs are doing is in the middle is showing you where the abundance of SAV is, and it's going to be about that 10, 11 area in a pretty nice shaped curve. And then in 2023, there's none. And then as we come into the 2024, it was along this edge here. So what we need, if you're going to try to get SAV in the 9s and the 10s, water level will have to be lower. For the 12s, you know, you get to about 13 feet of elevation, 12 and a half, that's going to be a great condition for SAV, you know, germination and recovery. So what this is telling you is just that you need shallower water levels for plants to grow better. In this room last week, the FGCU contract that is going on from the legislature to take a look at lake health. They had a public meeting here, and it was really cool. They come in and they basically got stakeholders assembled in this room, and they asked 3 questions. Have you seen changes on the lake in your experience? What do you think the potential causes of those changes are, and what solutions do you think should be investigated in order to better, you know, lake health? And it was really great to hear their perspective. We had lots of guides out of Roland Martin's that were here, and these are people that spend 100, 200 hours, I mean days, a year on the lake. Who has a better perspective? Our scientists are out there, but not that frequently. And so they had really interesting and fantastic perspective on what they're seeing, why they're seeing it, and brought some really interesting solutions to the table. So we're pretty excited about this study. In January, we'll get a final report from FGCU. So they had 2 stakeholder meetings, one here and one in Okeechobee. They're going to take that information back and kind of digest it. They're also having individual meetings with the experts on Lake Okeechobee, like they'll go to FWC and talk to their experts, our experts, Audubon, anybody that they felt had appropriate information to provide. And they're going to put all that together in a summary report that we'll get in January, beginning of January, for their findings on what can we do on the lake, not looking at water levels because that's controlled by LOSUM, but under those types of higher water levels, if we see them, what can we do inside the lake to help the ecology of the lake? So it's a pretty interesting study. One of the things that we are doing, and this is really spurred by Colonel Roman's suggestions, we are looking at, so she's talking about the permanent wave attenuation barriers. We have a study that we just started. They're looking at turbidity screening as a pilot for that. So what we do is we go out and we put these turbidity barriers, or it's basically a wave attenuation barrier out here to stop flows from coming here and hopefully keeping turbidity on this side and letting this calm area for particles in the water to fall out, because that's what turbidity is. It's just how much stuff do you have in the water other than water so that it's not clear. And we're doing paired experiments on looking at SAV of, are we going to see recovery in this area compared to the outside? And then are we going to see any type of recovery over here where there's not a turbidity barrier? So this is that pilot study to say, how effective would this type of technology be before we go and spend a lot of money to put permanent features out on the landscape. So this is really exciting research that we're doing at the district. Looking at the St. Lucie, the inflows and salinities, when you look across that time series at the top, anytime you see blue, those are releases from the lake. So we have not had any lake releases since April of 24. All of the inflows now are coming from the basin itself. Over this past week, we've had about 835 CFS coming into the basin. And what we're seeing is, we had a lot more flow a month ago, and pretty much most of the estuary from the upper to the mid-estuary was very fresh. Now we're seeing it get back to that gradient that is more appropriate for an estuary, where you can get into that zone between 15 and 18, and here's where oysters are most abundant. And you see that we are approaching getting back into the optimal salinity zone for oysters on the St. Lucie. And for our year this year, it hasn't been as great a year as 2 years ago. At the end of the season, there can be a last kind of spawn. We see this side as kind of bimodal in its peak, but we'll have to wait for those data to come in to see how they're going to finish out for oyster recruitment in the St. Lucie. On the Caloosahatchee side, I spoke about it earlier, that this is all of the basin inflow that came from those storm events, so there was no capacity for lake water. And as that has subsided, the Army Corps has been able to implement pulse releases again to the Caloosahatchee. And we see that with all of the rains that were occurring, it was very fresh in the Caloosahatchee, all the way down almost to Cape Coral. And now that salinity gradient is receding back to, usually it's about fresh from Fort Myers to S69, and then you have that gradient that continues out into San Carlos Bay. And we're seeing that at Cape Coral, and I don't have my glasses on. I do, but I can't. Shell Point, sorry. That we're in the optimal range for oysters, and it's always a little saltier at the end at Sanibel. But what we are seeing is a just phenomenal oyster recruitment year in the Caloosahatchee. These numbers down here are just mind-boggling, and it's a fantastic year for oysters in the Caloosahatchee.
So going south of the lake, looking at the stormwater treatment areas, you can see over here on the far right-hand side for water year 25, which started just back in May. So far, the STAs have already processed just shy of 1 million acre-feet of water and runoff coming through them. Now that we are in the dry season, these bottom numbers here that you barely show up, you'll start to see as the flows increase from Lake Okeechobee during the dry season down through the stormwater treatment areas, you'll start to see those numbers start coming up. But keep in mind that we're coming off a year where the STAs just processed close to 1.5 million acre-feet of water. So Lawrence, give us a feel for how they've handled that water so far this water year.
So we've got about, as John said, about 943,000 acre-feet going through the STAs to date, 70 from the lake. You look at the inflow concentrations and the outflow concentrations, and they're higher than we would like to see. And in the past couple of meetings, I brought to you why we're seeing those high numbers. And if you remember, in June, we had exceptional rain events, and we had inflow concentrations that were well outside our period of record, that were very, very high, that are still in our averaging for this year. So although those levels have skewed our numbers higher, the STAs themselves on 7-day, on 28-day performance are performing really, really well. But that number that you see there, and that's a compliance number that we have to meet. When you have these extraordinary, phenomenal natural events that are well above what we anticipate them taking, they can skew those numbers much, much higher. This is the time of the year where the STAs, especially, you've had the whole wet season that they are taking water continuously. They can get deeper than their stage target. When we get into those first couple months of the dry season, it's their time to have a reprieve, to have kind of a resting period. This is a time of period where we go in and we do a lot of vegetation management activities to increase the health of the STA, because being too deep for too long will stress that vegetation. It's a natural system. So as we go through this period, we look not to take lake water. We look for the STAs to be able to kind of recalibrate, for us to go in and do any vegetation work we need to do to make them healthy and robust so that they can be prepared for the next hard-working wet season. And this is a look around the STAs and what water depths are, and everything is online except for the central, which is offline. We're doing some work in there in STA 1 East, and then in 5, 6, and 3, 4. Coming down into Biscayne Bay, we're seeing just a fantastic setup for salinity there. We're between 20 and about 14, and that's a fantastic setup going into the dry season.
So looking at how water's been moved around the southern portion of the system, you can see the water conservation areas in total have received just over 1.5 million acre-feet of inflows from the north, the west, as well as the east. And going down into Everglades National Park, inclusive of some of this return seepage over on the eastern side of the park, there's been about just over 1 million acre-feet of inflows into the park itself. For the lower East Coast, and the water that has been directed to tide in that area, about 2.2 million acre-feet. So right now for the water conservation areas, starting there in the upper right-hand side for Area 1, you can see Area 1 is below its regulation schedule, sort of dried up and not a whole lot of inflows. Corps of Engineers has closed all of the S10s, so we're no longer moving water from Area 1 down into Area 2. You can see Area 2 is still above its regulation schedule, but it's got a nice recession coming down in parallel to that regulation schedule. Right now, the Corps of Engineers is moving about 700 cubic feet per second from Area 2 down into Area 3. Although even with that inflows, a lot of the inflows from the north through the stormwater treatment areas have curtailed. So it's mainly that water that was already up in areas 1 and 2 is now transitioning down into 3. But despite that, you can see hasn't been a whole lot of rain over top of Area 3. So Area 3's got a pretty decent recession going on right now from last time that we got together and talked about conditions in the Everglades. So it's rapidly approaching its schedule. That recession is continuing. Right now we have more outflows than there are inflows into Area 3. S12B, C, and D are still open. S12A has closed in conformance with the combined operating plan. But we're still continuing to move water into the L29 through the 333 structures. DOT just recently granted another 30-day extension for a total of 180 days to allow the L29 canal to remain up at that 8.5 feet NGVD. Going down the South Dade conveyance system, operations are moving into the more of the dry season. A lot of the pumping on 332B and C have curtailed, but we're still continuing to pump at 332D to maintain flows into Taylor Slough. S197 has been closed for some time now, but S18C all the way towards the bottom is still open, allowing that flow down into the panhandle of the park. So what can we expect for the future? You can see over there on the left-hand side, Area 2, we expect that recession to continue in parallel to the schedule as we go deeper into the dry season. For Area 3, it's looking like possibly this month, but if not then, the beginning of December, Area 3 should be back to its regulation schedule. We'll get back below that regulation schedule and start relieving a lot of that high water conditions that have occurred through Area 3. So Lawrence, how are the water depths looking in the Everglades overall?
Thanks, John. So you see from last month to this month, John just talked about the recession rates that have been occurring, and in each one of the water conservation areas, you're getting this darker green color at the northern end, which is shallower depths. So remember, there's topographic gradient between the north end and the south end of all of the water conservation areas. So when water stops flowing into these conservation areas, then you're going to get the drying of the top end and you'll get some pooling in the bottom end. And so it's kind of not tough on ecology, but it's not uniform throughout. So sometimes there's some trade-offs for what's going on in the top end and the bottom end compared to what's happening in the middle. Something that we do see over here in Everglades National Park is there is still really good connectivity in Lossman Slough and Shark River Slough, and Taylor Slough is just starting to get a little drier. So as these water levels are coming down, that's a really good thing. One thing we want to be mindful of is as we're moving water out into the park, this top area of Water Conservation Area 3 can be prone to getting very dry. Then we risk the chance for fire. The Alley North colony, a really large wading bird colony, is about right here. It can have about 60,000 nests in it in a year. So we worry about maybe getting too low too quickly. So it's something to consider as we look at operations. We're trying to relieve the ponding in the bottom for the fur-bearing animals, and we need to be mindful of what are we doing for the wading birds, as we have a lot of this water, and if we have a long protracted drying season, we can have a really good wading bird nesting success year. And that's a great setup for this slide. So you see this graphic over here is really pretty cool. All the colors are trying to tell you what conditions are like and how they are for birds. So it's a habitat suitability index. And if you have blues, then it's too deep. There's not a 3-foot wading bird, 3-foot-legged wading bird. Optimal is green, dries are brown. So what happens and how things worked historically, and that's what we're seeing with the water conditions right now, is the foraging begins down along the coast at this time of the year. It's not deep down here. There's plenty of prey. All of this is really too deep for them to use, but this water depth and being inundated allows for prey production for these wading birds. So they're not using the area now, but as the recession rates occur, these green areas will start to increase along this area and all the way up into the north. And what these birds do is they move from the south end of the system up through to the north following that recession and those optimal conditions. And all of that prey that is produced gets put into drying pools. It's like the grocery store becomes full and they can go shop very easily to go feed their young. So this setup that we have right now, these deep conditions, or these very wet conditions, you could say, really put a great setup for what we saw in 2018 and 2021 with the banner nesting years. And that's what we're seeing typically right now with this, is it might have a really great setup. As long as we have the appropriate recession rate from here, we could have an outstanding wading bird nesting season. And then my last slide, we're looking at salinity within Florida Bay. Currently, average salinity across the bay is 18, which is fantastic. And these graphics over here at the top, 40 is where we say hypersalinity begins. You have the blue interquartile range, which is the 25th to the 75th. And then we added a feature a couple months ago, the dotted gold line, which is the performance target. It's from paleo records of what the bay was like historically. And we see salinity setups either within that historic range or at the very bottom of the interquartile range. And this is a fantastic setup for salinity going into the dry season. And if we look at water depths in Taylor Slough, over here, we have water depths that are above 2 feet. So in this landscape, in here, we have water. And we've talked about the sponge and keeping the sponge wet. So the sponge, there's water above the sponge now. And as you go through the dry season, of course, this will recede, but it's being able to have water that keeps this area wet so that if we did get really dry in the dry season, when we can start passing water again, it doesn't have to refill this sponge because this is going to impede water's ability to flow from it to the bay. So we're in a great setup hydrologically and from a salinity standpoint going into the dry season for Florida Bay. One last slide. At the end of it was Helene and Milton had come through, and we started to see a bloom in the Central Bay, and that's really because of the nutrient source coming off of this part of, there's dead rack in there still from past hurricanes. This isn't a bloom that has toxic algae in it. It is starting to decrease a bit, and we think that it will definitely dissipate during the dry season, and we don't really see it as a grave concern currently.
All right, so looking at the Climate Prediction Center and what they're projecting over the next several months for the dry season, you can see they're still tagging the month of November as that transition from the wet season into the dry season. But once you get out into December, January, and the remaining months of the dry season, they're calling for that substantially increased chances of below normal rainfall for the next several months going into this dry season. But for the next 2 weeks, this first week, we're also forecasting that much below rainfall. But when we get out into week 2, you've probably seen on your morning news, there's a storm out in the Caribbean that's trying to get organized. I'm not quite sure, it's too early now to tell what will happen with that storm. But regardless, it does look as if it will bring some rain and some moisture over across the district the middle of next week. So we're just going to keep on monitoring it and be prepared. Over the last several years, if I'm not mistaken, typically there's always been some sort of rain event right around the Thanksgiving time frame at some portion of the district. Typically it's in the southern portion of the district, but every now and then it sneaks over to the west coast. With that, back to you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thanks both very much. Any questions or comments?
I have a question, Mr.
We'll start
Chair.
with Colonel Roman.
Thank you for the presentation. Lawrence, I have a couple of questions. One on the snail kite nesting. With the food being plentiful with the invasive apple snail, does that extend the nesting season then throughout the year?
It has. It's changed. It used to be a setup really from June. And now we're getting year-round nesting through much of the state. It's not just a Lake Okeechobee phenomenon, but it's throughout the throughout the state.
Okay, that's very, I guess that's good, but it's changing the whole behavior of the particular species. The other question I have is on this turbidity curtain. Is there someone on your scientific team that's the lead on this project, or How is that, who's the team?
Yes, so this is being run in combination between my shop and Jen Reynolds' shop. So Zach Welch, you know Zach well. He's the lead from our science side, and Stacy Olis is handling the contracting part of it for getting the contractors out there and running the show. But we were responsible for setting up the scientific monitoring associated with it.
Yeah, and Zach's been out with us on Coot Bay with FWC and FGCU, so he was your representative from the scientific team.
Correct.
On this yellow curtain, is that a specific type of material, or is that just yellow plastic?
It's just yellow plastic. It extends from the water surface to the substrate surface. And so it's held on top by cable, it's affixed to the bottom by anchors. It made it through the hurricanes, through the Seiche. And so what it's designed to do is exactly like what the concrete barriers would do. It is not allowing for the push of water through it. So it has that area behind it that will be calm. And in that calm area, we're hoping to see that turbidity settles out, and you get a clear condition where even at a lake stage that wouldn't be optimal for growth, you can still have light penetrating the surface down deep enough to have some sort of vegetation response.
Does the yellow plastic provide an attachment surface?
For Fido, no. Oh gosh, I'm having a paraphyton. So, paraphyton could attach there and stuff like that. Snails could attach there. But it's not where you look at those large concrete structures also provide habitat. So you would have like a dual benefit. This is just a pilot to see if we can get the wave energy to break in order to have clearer water behind it.
Yeah, and it's up in the marsh area.
It's right before the marsh area.
Yeah, where it's more protected.
Correct.
Okay, great. I'll get with Zach. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Bergeron.
Well, I think that what I had said earlier about the Tamiami Trail, that, and when you look at some of the exhibits you showed there in the Central Everglades, which I was out there the other day on a tour, and across 750,000 acres, I think I've seen about a dozen birds. And based upon what you were showing me earlier, we're about a foot above schedule in the area 2, and we're about 6 inches above in area 3. And that just leads back into getting the water beyond the Tamiami Trail and operating the S12s and the 343s on a condition base, working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, letting that 40% of the 2.5 million acre feet under SERP flow on the western side, rather than the cumulative backup as we shut those gates 9 months out of the year. The importance of highly prioritizing the Blue Shanty to be able to accomplish the 60% of 2.5 million acre feet on the eastern part of Shark River Slough would seem like a very high priority for us, working with the task force, our federal partners, the Corps, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Park Service. Extremely important. When you have the cumulative backup at the trail, it's severe impacts on the Central Everglades and obviously lack of water to Florida Bay. So we're heading in the right direction. I think it's important that we understand that at the end of the day, we want to match the inflows to the outflows. where we have equalization of water levels on both sides of the Tamiami Trail. And that'll be a great day. And we'll start getting benefits of infrastructure we started building decades ago. The three miles of bridges and the additional 333 North. And I think the capacity on the 333s is about 3,000 cubic feet per second. Am I correct, John? But we can't get that capacity until we finish the Tamiami Trail, which looks like March of 2026, where we'll start achieving more of that 60% of water flowing south as per SERP. I want to continue to work with our staff and U.S. Fish and Wildlife on the condition-based operations of the S12s and the 343A and B. We're going to have additional capacity with the new 3 culverts that are going in the L28, moving water south, having that connectivity with water flowing by gravity across the face of that Tamiami Trail. So we're heading in the right direction, and I think it's important that the task force, that we have a meeting, I think, in December, understands that the Blue Shanty is a very high priority in order to get the benefit of everything that we're building north of the trail. Because if you're going to move water south, the Tamiami Trail becomes a extreme high priority to let that water move south, stop seagrass from dying in Florida Bay, quit drowning wildlife in the Central Everglades. And I just think that we have, in the next couple of years, the ability to have that connectivity. And we will be getting benefits on projects we built decades ago when we achieved that. So it's exciting to see that working with our federal partners, the Corps, the Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Interior, and our 3 state agencies, FWC, DEP, and South Florida Water Management, that we put that as a very high priority, and we'll get benefits catastrophically when we get to that point. And Drew, I think these issues down at the trail with the airboat tours, to making sure that they have gotten financial compensation to be ready for SERP, delivering this water, working with DOT on their schedule of finishing the road, and obviously the Osceola camp has to be elevated, and I don't know whether that's a Corps issue or a DOT issue, to make sure that the Osceola camp has to be lifted in order to be able to let this water flow. These are critical to get the benefit. And maybe March of '26, we'll be able to make that big step, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Butler?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lawrence, you referenced one of the slides, the FGCU study. Colonel Roman talked about it earlier today. And just comment, they're still open for ideas and comments. Go to lakecoaststudy.com. And I don't know when it closes. I'm not going to try to guess and give a wrong date. But it's probably pretty imminent. But lakecoaststudy.com, and get your comments in if you have any thoughts or ideas on how to help Lake Okeechobee.
Thanks. Mr. Steinle?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe go back to the lake and a little bit about the recovery scenarios that we might be. So it's clear to me, we've heard over the past years that we need about 12 feet for 3 months or so for meaningful SAV recovery. What happens, is that definitive on those factors? In other words, if you got down to 14 feet or 14 and a half feet for 3 months, I'm imagining there would be some beneficial impact to SAV, or would there not be?
Yes and no. So we have 12 as a target. Of course, you're going to have kind of a gradient that goes through there. The 12 is saying this is optimal.
Yep.
Would you have benefit if we got to 13? Sure. You know, as long as light is able to penetrate and get to that depth in order for germination to happen and for plants to photosynthesize and kind of make that time. So you're going to have a lesser, but is anything good? Sure. But 14 just really doesn't provide enough area across the lake to have a meaningful increase, where we're going to say any increase is good, but we want to really have a year that, because these plants are resilient and you want to allow them to grow. You want them allowed to grow and to have an ascension rate where they can keep growing and following that water depth so that you can get taller, more robust plants that can make it through the winter. And you're not going to see that acreage at 14 that you would if we were at, say, 13 or 12 and a half. So it's going to be incremental on your benefit as you get shallower.
So I guess where I'd go with that is, what are the scenarios? What's the analysis telling us? So if you factor in what the expected weather rainfall is going to be like during the dry season, and then the schedule of releases, which I know we define as non-harmful releases. Maybe others would not define it as like that. But what are the scenarios? I'm assuming we run scenarios. What's the likelihood of achieving that 12 and a half feet?
So as I said, right now the lake is at 16.09. You want to get down to 12 feet, that's 4 feet roughly, round numbers. So you're going to have to move out about 1.8 million acre feet of water to get down to 12 feet from where we are by June 1st. The short version, Mr. Steinley, is we're going to need some help from our friend Mother Nature. Generally, you can see on the graphic on the screen, all the years we started at 16, made it down around 13, started at 14, made it down to 11. Generally speaking, during the course of a dry season, a normal dry season, the lake drops about 3 feet, give or take, between 2 and 3 feet. So to get to that 4 feet down to 12, or the other metric for recovery operations is 11 feet for 60 days. So that's 5 feet of water, or 2.25 million acre feet of water. To put that in perspective, so far this wet season, we've moved about 2.25 million acre feet off the lower East Coast to tide. So that's the volume of water that we're talking about. We're going to need some help from our friend Mother Nature to get down there, while staying in the guidelines of LOSUM of 1,400 cubic feet per second of all cumulative inflows to the St. Lucie, inclusive of C23-24, as well as C44 runoff, and under 2,100 cubic feet per second to the Caloosahatchee, while maximizing to the extent practicable all of the flows south through the EAA and down into the stormwater treatment areas and the Everglades.
So, well, that's helpful. So in a typical weather dry season, you're losing about 2 to 3 feet. So that gives us 14 to 13 feet, right? So you're talking about another 2 to 1 or 1 to 2 feet.
Correct.
Right? That
And as
need
you
to
saw
get
in
out.
the predictions from the Climate Center, they're projecting increased chances of substantially below normal, so we may just get that help.
Yep. And that would be through running recovery through, I would imagine, the dry season.
Correct, all the way through to
Okay.
May.
And one of the things to consider, and this is why I'm glad these conversations are coming up now, and getting, if the Army Corps could get a start on it in this next month, is that those flows going out to the estuaries, you're looking at when does spawning occur within the estuaries, and when does beneficial kind of start to fall off of being beneficial, and it's really mid-March that you would want to definitely be stopped, because that's when the spawning is going to be in highest gear. But then we're also fortunate in that in April and May, ET kicks up tremendously and takes water off of the lake almost at the same rate. I mean, John, if it's just 3,000 CFS coming off of the lake just by ET. So I think a combination of what climate does for us in the latter half of the dry season and what operations could do at the beginning of the dry season, this could be a fantastic year setup to do a recovery operation if that's what the Army Corps decides upon.
And you said the process isn't locked in, right? There's review point, whether it's every quarter or more frequently?
Well, there's a mid-season review called for in LOSUM, so generally after the first of the year, I'll put it end of January, beginning of February timeframe, that the Corps would make an assessment, obviously with our input, on the likelihood of success of getting down to that 12 feet for 90 days, given what weather conditions we see at that point in time.
A high likelihood would mean continue.
Correct.
And a lower likelihood
There'd be a conversation.
Would be a conversation.
Correct.
Okay.
So generally, when I talk about that 3 feet, as Lawrence mentioned, it's 1 foot for ET, 1 foot for just general water supply to make it through the dry season,
Yeah.
and then the other foot comes from operations and operational management.
Okay, thank you.
So what's the difference in that 1 foot in operations between recovery and not recovery?
That's what we're engaging with the Corps of Engineers on right now. They've got projections, we've run some things, we're coming up with differing results, so we're going to have some additional discussions with them about where the likely outcome could be. And of course, it's all dependent, as I've said a couple times now, on Mother Nature and what she does. But you're generally talking in that 12, 13-foot range.
Okay. Keep us up to date.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you will. Anyone have anything else? Thank you. Ms. Smith, monthly financial report.
Good afternoon, governing board members. The monthly financial statement in your packet and posted on the district website is through the month of September of 2024. A few highlights on the revenue side. We've collected $1.1 billion in new revenue through the month of September and expended $1 billion. The $1.1 billion includes $677 million from intergovernmental, mostly state appropriated funds for Everglades restoration as reimbursements from DEP, and $343 million in taxes. We collected $52 million from August to September, of which over $48 million was through intergovernmental reimbursements. And we have fully collected all of our ad valorem taxes. As a comparison, our collections, comparing collections to September of 2023, we've collected $154 million than last September. On the expenditure side, we've expended $102 million over the previous month, with $69 million in restoration and $28 million in activities in support of operation and maintenance of lands and works. Of the $1 billion that we expended over the past fiscal year, we expended $622 million in restoration and $265 million in O&M. Compared to September of 2023, we've expended $43 million more. That's all I have for you.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Thanks, John. We'll move to general public comment.
We have none, Mr. Chairman.
In that case, we'll move to board comment. Mr. Butler.
None today, sir.
Well, hang on, check that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll hear from Mark Perry.
A late addition.
Sorry
Perry.
to get that in earlier, but just some quick kind of closing comments too. I think the reports are great and kind of showing us where things are going on the inflows, particularly to the St. Lucie estuary side. As you heard me talk this earlier about over 330,000 acre feet, mostly from basin, C23, 24, 25, and C44 into works of the district. Those canals which then go into the estuary, that's significant. It's almost 3/4 of a foot off the lake if you look at it that way. Going into lake recovery mode, we're all about working to that. We meet on the periodic science calls, which are now local engagement calls, and the Corps setting that up pretty well to look at this dry season as significant to help get the lake draw down so that we can get in there. So I appreciate all those discussions that just happened on working to that. You looked at 943,000 acre feet going through the STAs, primarily only 70,000 of that from the lake. All that other is basin runoff. We have to find ways to attenuate flows from basin runoff to the STAs so that we make more capacity for sending lake water south through our STAs and into the Everglades. We have to kind of work on that to implement LOSUM and everything else. Just draw your attention to I know the SERP reports and the NEEP reports are attached to your significant things happening there. The C44 reservoir just is still under that operation testing and monitoring period. And there's some seepage management features they're having a contract for. They won't do that until September next year. And unfortunately, it may not be even operational. And may have to keep pushing that out on the IDS. The FSGU, Florida Gulf Coast University study, thanks for bringing those up, and we're participating in those workshops too. And then the BMAP updates, as you mentioned, being this 19th through the 21st, and then also the 18th being the NEEP workshop. Appreciate the district holding those workshops and really focusing in on how we can improve on NEEP. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Chairman, we have no additional public comment.
Thanks. Mr. Butler.
No comment, sir.
Colonel Roman.
Nothing additional, thank you.
Mr. Steinle. Mr. Bergeron.
None.
You don't want to say long live the teasing.
Long live the Everglades.
Thank you. It's not a meeting without that. I appreciate it. I'll wrap up. In recognition of our nation's veterans who served our country, the district observed Veterans Day on Monday, and I'd like to extend a special appreciation, obviously, to Colonel Roman and to all the district staff who have served in our armed forces. Thank you all very much. I'd also like to thank the staff here at the John Boy Auditorium and the City of Clewiston for allowing us to use these great facilities and for your time and assistance. And I also want to thank our governing board team, our external affairs team, our communications team for putting this meeting and this week's events together. It's seamless for us up here. It's easy for us. We just show up, and I know a lot goes into it, and I really appreciate it because it's good to get out on the road. It's good to see the district. It's great to be in all our communities, and we really appreciate the time and effort you all put into it. I also want to thank Mike Barber, Jimmy Barnes, James Krupika, Joel Arietta from our field stations for your assistance at the Clewiston Field Station. We can't hold these types of events without the hard work of our staff throughout the district. So we're going to be back in West Palm next month for the December board meeting. We also have an Audit and Finance Committee meeting on December 12th, and I'll look forward to seeing you all there. And this meeting is adjourned. Thanks.